Welcome to our very first webinar that we're delivering as part of the Hearing Medicines Discovery Syndicate. So it's great that so many of you are joining us. So we've got over 200 people registered for this afternoon's seminar. So we're really looking forward to it, and I'm really excited. Just a quick note on communication support before we get started. We've got speech to text reporting. So if you need to use that, you can click on the closed caption button. If you kind of hover your mouse and click on that, and you'll get live speech text. And we've also got BSL interpreters. So hopefully everyone can access the webinar. If there's any problems at all at any point, just add it to the chat box, and we can help resolve things. So I'm Ralph Holme. I'm Executive Director of Research at Action on Hearing Loss. And our charity is here to support people who are deaf, those that have hearing loss, and those that are living with tinnitus. And we're focused on helping people today by providing information and advice. We're campaigning for equality. And of course, we're funding pioneering research to bring about treatments that will prevent the onset of hearing loss, enable people to regain their hearing, and hopefully ultimately silence tinnitus. So we're funding research, but it's not just about funding research. We also want to bring the community together to really accelerate the development of treatments. And that's why at the beginning of the year, we set up a partnership with the Medicines and Discovery Catapult, and we established the Hearing Medicines Discovery Syndicate. And it's through that initiative that we're delivering today's webinar. So at this point, I'd actually just like to hand over to Dr. Alessandra Gaeta, who is from the Medicines Discovery Catapult, and she'll say a few words about the syndicate and about our webinar this afternoon.
Yes, thank you, Ralph. Welcome, everybody, and thanks again for joining us this afternoon. So the Hearing Medicine Discovery Syndicate bring together UK capabilities and expertise in hearing research, drug discovery, and cell and gene therapy. And it's a partnership of Medicine Discovery Catapult, Action on Hearing Loss, and also the National Institute for Health Research and the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. The purpose of the syndicate is really to rapidly connect innovators that are working in the hearing field or are interested in working in this area to expertise and capabilities that they need to advance their research programs. And we're really pleased to launch today our first webinar in a series of webinars that will be running until December. And in this very first webinar, what we're gonna cover an overview of the emerging hearing therapeutic field, an overview of the therapeutic pipeline, and most importantly, a perspective of people living with hearing disorders. I will now hand over back to Ralph for introducing our first speaker, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Okay. Thanks, Alessandra. So one more tiny bit of housekeeping before we kick off. If you hover your mouse, you'll see that there's a box that says Q&A. And so if you've got any questions for our speakers, we've got 3 speakers, just put your question into that box. People can vote on them as well. So if you see a question that you like, vote on that, and it will rise to the top. And then at the end, we've got a Q&A session, and I'll ask the speakers the questions that everyone submits. If you're a BSL user and you want to ask your question in BSL, when we get to the Q&A session at the end, if you just raise your virtual hand, and then we can switch the camera on and you can ask your question in BSL. But for everyone else, please just ask your question in the Q&A box. Okay, so with that all done, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Professor David Baguley. David is Professor of Hearing Sciences at University of Nottingham. David's got both research and clinical expertise in hearing and tinnitus. I think he's perfectly placed to introduce this area to us. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you, Alessandra. It's a pleasure to be the opening speaker and to give us an overview of this fascinating, complicated, challenging, but ultimately hopeful area. I work in the Hearing Sciences group at the University of Nottingham, which is a broad spectrum, full spectrum auditory research group. My work is largely translational and clinical, looking at tinnitus, hyperacusis, and ototoxicity. Some potential conflicts of interest. I don't believe that any are fatal for our discussion this afternoon, but some consultancy, some royalties, and some private practice and trusteeships. What I'd like us to do in the next 15 minutes is to just walk through an overview of the situation regarding hearing disorders and these novel therapeutics, for us to look at the nature of hearing disorder, and particularly for the non-specialists here to give some insights there, for us to pause and step inside the scale of the problem, both in terms of numbers and finance, but also importantly to start to glimpse some of the wider health issues. And then importantly, let's look at some of the emerging reasons for hope in this important area. So let's start by considering the sense of hearing and considering the abilities that it gives us. The ability to detect the presence or absence of a sound, to extract features from it so we can recognize it, so that we can learn about it, to localize the point of origin of a sound, and to discern if there's any movement, and in what direction, in what plane that movement might be, and how rapid that movement might be, to discriminate and make sense of sound, particularly, importantly, in the presence of background noise, to recognize sound, as we've said, and we can draw all of those together into the concept, the framework of auditory scene analysis, first introduced by Professor Bregman, but this idea that our hearing produces an analysis of the auditory scene around us that we're a participant in. Our sense of hearing is accurate and it is sensitive, but that leads to an innate vulnerability, a fragility, and that's the issue that we're talking about this afternoon. Let's just have a little look at the mechanisms of hearing and consider where we are orientating our attention this afternoon. Many of you, of course, are aware that sound is drawn down the ear canal, which resonates at high frequencies, captured by the eardrum, and then played across the air-containing middle ear by the ossicles, the smallest bones in your body. As the sound leaves the stapes bone, it enters the cochlea, named after the Greek for snail. And this resembles a snail shell, currant bun type shape. It's about the size of a marrowfat pea and directly behind your pupil. And the cochlea is the transducer of the auditory system. Set inside the snail shell coil is the organ of Corti, vibrating with sound. And as it does so, the stereocilia of the hair cells are moved as they set inside, particularly the outer hair cells, this tectorial membrane. The inner hair cells don't synapse quite into the tectorial membrane. And as the organ of Corti moves, the stereocilia move and fire the nerve cell. Now this is sensitive and fragile, it's complex, and the disorders of hearing that can arise are complex. They can be hair cell dysfunction, they can be neural dysfunction, particularly of the synapses from the inner hair cells, these ribbon synapses. They can affect the structure of the inner ear and the metabolic functioning of the inner ear. Does it have sufficient nutrient? Does it have sufficient energy? And is there structural damage which is causing disorder within the cochlea? And then importantly, the cochlea, of course, connected to the brain with this rich auditory system within the brain leading up to the auditory cortex where sound is recognized and the meaning is analyzed. But important to recognize that this system is two-way. There are as many fibers and at times many more fibers leading down from the auditory cortex back down to the cochlea, allowing the brain to seek out sound of important meaning, particularly at the various junction points between the cochlea and the cortex. That efferent system, that downward system, can be dysfunctional, just as the transmission of sound from the cochlea to the cortex can be dysfunctional. And then importantly, links at many levels with systems of emotion and learning. Hearing is deeply enmeshed within our sense of well-being and meaning. And we'll come to touch on that, I think, later in the session today. Now here I've done a word cloud of some of the major disorders that can happen in terms of the hearing system, each with a particular etiology, each with particular mechanisms, and each can be life-altering for people who are experiencing it. For each of those, there is a genotype, by which I mean, of course, some genetics, the word points towards that, but molecular biological dysfunction that we're starting to glimpse and understand. And importantly, we're needing to take that knowledge and fit it against what's called the phenotype. That is the behavior, manifestation, and impact and test results around that particular disorder. And it's really important that we hold these two in balance so that we can start to understand the deep structure of auditory disorders and start to build these novel therapeutics that we're talking about in the session this afternoon. Now, what then is the scale of the problem? Depending which health economy you live in, it's either slightly more or slightly less than 1 in 1,000 live births have a severe to profound hearing loss. But clearly many, many people in need of early and technological intervention around the world. Recent work has estimated that between 6 to 8% of the world's population live with a troubling and disabling hearing loss, and that approximates 500 million people. This is a widespread problem. And then some of the other disorders. Let's look at tinnitus and hyperacusis, particular interests of mine. 2% of the adult population experience significantly troublesome tinnitus, affecting their sleep, affecting their well-being, affecting their concentration. And this isn't just an adult problem. 1 in 30 children aged 11 experiences bothersome tinnitus that's persistent and intrusive. So this is a significant problem. Hyperacusis, by which we mean the reduction, decrease, or collapse of sound tolerance abilities, affects approximately 2% of the population. Rather than hearing the world as too quiet, the world is too loud. And then ototoxicity. 40% of men treated with cisplatin for testicular cancer who survive have hearing loss or tinnitus that carries on with them in their survivorhood and can affect quality of life. And the figures appear much higher for children. And this is costing society a tremendous amount of money. The burden is very substantial. Worldwide, the World Health Organization estimated between 750, 790 billion US dollars per annum as a cost to society of untreated hearing loss. And tinnitus costing the UK in its widest sense of societal costs, not just healthcare costs, £2.7 billion per year. These are substantial problems and leading to further substantial health risks, which we're only really recently starting to understand. Untreated hearing loss in middle life is the highest modifiable risk for dementia, carrying 9% of the risk of developing clinically significant dementia. And hearing loss untreated can lead to problems with emotional well-being, reduced emotional vitality, and research data that tells us that hearing aids are poor at communicating emotional ability, emotional information, just like they're poor at communicating musical information. The same goes for cochlear implants. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised at that. Now, we are replete with technological solutions. I apologize to whichever hearing aid company and cochlear implant company I borrowed this slide from, but it adequately shows we have points of intervention with technology, and these technologies are good, and they replace some hearing abilities. But as we've said, their ability to communicate emotion, music, and hearing noise are limited, and uptake is limited. Now, what work is going on? Let's compare hearing loss and tinnitus with anxiety and depression. Here's a graph of the number of publications per year in each of those 4 domains: depression, anxiety, hearing loss, and tinnitus. These two very much the poor relation, orders of magnitude below the others. And when it comes to pharmacological solutions, drug solutions for these problems, lagging behind and little so far up to 2017 of an apparent upturn. So there's a job of work to be done. But what hope can we discern in this important area? Well, there are indications of improved diagnostics and understanding of the phenotype, as I've described, of these various hearing disorders. Better site of lesion testing, finding out where the problems actually are, and often they are problems and lesions rather than just one. What are the mechanisms, and thereby what are the targets that an intervention is hoping to hit? Improvements in psychoacoustic testing, testing hearing and noise, testing the very high frequencies which appear to be rather important for the quality of hearing, and the ability, particularly of the cochlea, to resolve frequency and temporal limans, small changes that the ear needs to be sensitive to. And a resurgence in the use of auditory evoked potentials. These had fallen rather into disuse, but the use of electrocochleography to determine cochlear health, and auditory brainstem responses to interrogate the ability of the neural auditory system to decode sound, and to use real world stimuli, environmental noises, words and speech, rather than the bleeps and tones that we've historically used. And then some improved outcome measures. Patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs, are really important. They need to be validated. They need to be validated in whatever cultural and linguistic context they're used, because the outworking of them is different. And increasingly, the involvement of patients in the design of these measures. What's important for a patient in terms of intervention and improvement? But also, rather than subjective or supplanting or complementing PROMs, are objective measures. In my research in tinnitus, this is particularly important. And we're looking at pupil dilation, auditory evoked potentials, and imaging to give us that objective measure. Work is ongoing in this area, and it's not there yet. And then biomarkers. Anna Schilder's going to talk, I think, a little bit about this in her presentation in a minute. And she's surveyed this scene and said there's much preclinical activity here, looking at neurotransmitter or other chemical indications or other biological indications of change in hearing status. So what then is the topography of auditory therapeutics? We're looking at systems that will predict who is vulnerable. That's perhaps particularly important in people who are about to undergo chemotherapy or who are going to be exposed to noise. Secondly, to look at prevention. What therapeutics can we have that prevent hearing loss in some of those challenging situations? And then to treat. Our present treatments are rather broad brush and often involve large doses of steroids when somebody develops a hearing loss. Clearly, there's a need for a much more precise treatment, and perhaps this prediction leading to precision medicine might speak directly into treatment. And then a philosophical move away from replacing hearing function into restoring hearing function. A move away from just technology into regenerative or restoring therapies that are truly effective in working in the hearing system. Now, work ongoing is going to be surveyed in the next presentation and indeed in presentations in the weeks to come. Regeneration of hair cells from the pillar cells around supporting the hair cells, neural regeneration, compounds to try and protect the auditory system. The cochlea is a difficult place to reach, and people are working hard on new technologies, micro application of technologies to try and introduce drugs into the cochlea in a titrated, known and careful fashion. There's lots to do, but lots of work going on and lots of evidence of collaboration, both among the different disciplines that are needed in this area, but also with industry. The last survey I was aware of showed that nearly 50 companies were active in this area, and about 8 working in preclinical, late preclinical and early clinical trials using real compounds, real drugs in real people to try and work in a therapeutic manner in this situation. So what I think I've shared with you is that auditory disorders are complex and the unmet need is extremely high. There's strong evidence of the emergence of collaboration, and that's both technology and therapeutics. There's much to hope for, but much to hope with. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, for that excellent overview. And I think it just does go to show, you know, we think of hearing loss and tinnitus as sort of one condition, but I think, you know, what struck me in your talk was that it's a complex condition, and there's actually many, many different things that make up hearing loss, and clearly, you know, we're going to need many different types of treatments. So I'd now like to move on and introduce Professor Anne Schilder, who's a NIHR research professor and also director of the Deafness and Hearing Problems theme within UCLH's Biomedical Research Center. Anne has been involved in several clinical trials of new treatments. So I think she's ideally placed to give us an overview of the hearing therapeutics pipeline and perhaps begin to unearth some of the challenges that we face in developing treatments. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Can you hear me? I think you can.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for asking me to take part in this very exciting webinar series. And it's great to see that so many of you from across the globe have joined us this afternoon. So in the next 15 minutes, I would like to take you a bit further into the world of novel hearing therapeutics, building very much on David's wonderful talk just now. So over the past decade, we have seen major discoveries in the mechanisms that underlie sensorineural hearing loss. And these discoveries have really allowed us to identify new therapeutic targets. And with those targets, discovery scientists have been able to develop novel therapeutics, drugs, genes, and cell therapies to protect, repair, and restore hearing loss. And together, this forms the ideal basis for the development of precision medicine for sensorineural hearing loss. This field is very much driven by biotech and pharma companies, and some of which are spin-offs from universities. And these developments are supported by large investments from both private and public funds. About a year ago, we published an overview of the companies that are active in this hearing field and their therapeutic approaches. And for each approach, we mapped the lead indication, the product, the therapeutic modality, the target, the mechanism of action, and the current phase of clinical development. And just over a year ago, we identified more than 40 companies that were active in the field, and they were included in this publication in otology and neurotology. But recently we have updated this overview, and you can find that overview on the website of Action on Hearing Loss by following this link. And we found that by now there are over 90 companies contending to be the first to deliver an effective novel hearing therapeutic. This big table also identified the biggest challenge in the field. And Ralph has just mentioned it again, that sensorineural hearing loss is not a disease or a condition. It's not like diabetes. It is a symptom of a wide range of underlying pathologies and mechanisms. And although there are some common pathways and mechanisms that will allow for more generic treatments, there will be no one size that will fit all. When you dig deep into the table, you will see that the more than 90 companies have a range of therapeutic approaches. Some focus on otoprotection, protecting hearing, regeneration of the hearing system, gene correction, or reduction of tinnitus perception. The lead indications of all these different companies and their approaches also varies strongly. And you can see on this slide the whole range of common expressions of hearing loss or balance problems. The therapeutic modality also varies from drugs to genes to cells, and some companies focus particularly on drug delivery systems. The routes of administration of all these new therapeutics varies from eardrops, transthympanic injections into the middle ear, to surgical delivery to the inner ear, sometimes via a cochlear implant or via a special delivery system. But there are also oral drugs in development and IV drugs. Looking at the various therapeutic targets and mechanisms of action, there are over 75 in this big table. And what we see is it's still a very young field. Many of the companies are still at preclinical stage. Some companies are in phase 1, so early phase trials, first in men. Some are progressing along the translational pathway and are moving up to phase 3, but none of those treatments are available in our clinics yet. So I would like to take you into an example of how we have worked towards developing a new drug treatment, how we took it from a discovery in the lab to a clinical trial in people with hearing loss. And this is the REGAIN project that I've been playing a leading role in. And the drug we have tested is a gamma-secretase inhibitor. It's a small molecule pharmaceutical drug that was developed initially for Alzheimer's disease, but found to be not effective when given as a systemic drug. And due to the mechanism of action, it was repurposed for topical use, so use in the ear for sensorineural hearing loss. And in the lab of Albert Edge in Boston, it was shown that in adult mice that were deafened by noise, a local application of this particular drug promoted inner ear supporting cells to transdifferentiate into hair cells by blocking a particular cell-to-cell signaling process. And in these mice, this led to partial recovery of hearing. So what we did in the REGAIN project, we translated that discovery into a clinical trial. And we started the program in 2015 when we brought together a consortium of partners from Germany, Greece, the UK, the Netherlands, and the US. And we, as a consortium, we applied for EU Horizon 2020 funding. So this made it quite unusual because many of the trials in the field are currently supported by commercial companies, whereas ours was a publicly funded trial. We first had to complete a whole range of preclinical work, formulation, pharmacokinetics, toxicity studies, and we did that all as part of the program. And then when we found the time was right, we took this discovery into the clinic in a phase 1 trial, which was completed in 2018, where we showed that the approach was safe. We then took it into a phase 2 trial, which we are currently still completing the final 12-month follow-ups. This is a very exciting stage because it means that in the next few months we'll be analyzing and disseminating the results. And just to explain this, the way we gave the patients the drug was through an intratympanic injection in one ear. We gave 3 injections 1 week apart in just one ear. And we included people who had mild to moderate hearing loss, which would allow us to not only see whether the drug is safe, but also to see whether the drug could have a beneficial effect. What we found during the trial that there was a tremendous interest in the program we were developing. There were almost 5,000 people approaching us from worldwide and hoping to take part. And there were several features in the international media, which again shows how we are meeting an unmet clinical need. But this trial also taught us a lot of lessons that we're not there yet, because there are many uncertainties at the moment. What is the best preclinical model? Should we be focusing on fruit flies, zebrafish, mouse, rats? And what type of deafness should we be studying in the preclinical models? Should we be studying animals that are not deafened by noise or by drugs, or should we use a mutant mouse model? And also the experiments and outcome measures used in the lab vary strongly. Then there is always a discussion, when is it the best time to move from the lab to the clinic? And I think many discovery scientists feel that the time is there when they feel the discovery work is complete. But that often means that it may take several more years. And what we see from the clinical side is that there is a real unmet clinical need. So we always say, we think we can start translating when it's time to test safety, when our animal work is more or less complete and showing that the drug is safe in the animal, and when the main questions have been answered. David just alluded to the best delivery method. We have a bit of an issue with the inner ear. It's hard to reach. And we also don't really know yet how the efficacy of the therapeutic in an animal model translates to human beings. And there's much that we don't know yet about human inner ear pharmacokinetics. And what we very much feel that there is an urgent need for a standard, for guidelines, and for a white paper for this field. Also, regarding the clinical trials, we still have some challenges to overcome. David just alluded to our advances in our ability to identify the site of lesion of the hearing loss in people with sensorineural hearing loss, whether it's the hair cells, the synapses, auditory neuropathy, or it's the stria. But the point is, many of those discoveries that we've made have not really been translated to the clinic yet. So in the lab, we have made major advances in identifying the site of lesion, but that hasn't been adopted in a clinical setting yet. We know that sensorineural hearing loss is a heterogeneous disease with many causes, and we don't know yet what the role of genetic testing is when we move into clinical trials of, for example, drug treatments. We've talked already about outcome measures. Currently, there is no international standard of what we should be measuring in these trials of novel hearing treatments. Should we be focusing on efficacy versus patient benefit? Another issue that is quite particular for our field, that there is quite a large variation in audiometric protocols and equipments and systems that are used across the world. And of course, this has an effect on the diagnosis and outcome measurements, which is something you don't necessarily want when you're in the middle of a trial. So again, there is an urgent need for an industry standard and also an urgent need for education of the hearing field. I think our discovery scientists need to learn a lot about the clinical need and what patients would want from these new treatments. I think for industry, there is a need to understand better what the hearing specific challenges are. For clinicians, there is a lot to learn about the causes of sensorineural hearing loss, the diagnostics, and how to run a clinical trial. And I think our patients deserve to know a lot about the opportunities, but also the limitation of these new treatments. We've talked about hearing discoveries, novel therapeutics, trials, and new hearing treatments. But there is a lot more to do, a lot more pieces of the puzzle to developing a new treatment. There's a lot more to do before we can get those treatments into the clinic and available for the people who most need it. And I strongly feel that we need to start preparing for it and develop models of adoption, since these novel approaches may radically change the way we deliver our hearing services. And this is work we've started at University College London hospitals, where we have engaged with the social scientists to support us in characterizing and understanding the interacting actors and factors that motivate and shape the adoption of novel hearing therapeutics. Because if we have a novel therapeutic, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be implemented and adopted in clinical practice. So we need to prepare for that. What we have also done to prepare is we have constructed early health economic models to assess the potential added value of these therapeutics. And these models can be used by drug developers to ensure that they put their efforts in developing hearing therapeutics that can be cost effective. And they can be used by decision makers, healthcare funders and commissioners to help decide which therapeutics represent value for money. We have recently published one of those models in otology and neurotology. It was a health economic model focusing on idiopathic sudden sensory neural hearing loss. This is a particular type of sensory neural hearing loss that is common, and also a therapeutic approach that several of the biotech companies are currently focusing on. We've also made a model for regenerative therapies for age-related hearing loss, and we've shown that both these approaches can be cost-effective with considerable room for improvement. Finally, I would like to illustrate how we can engage with the next generation of ENT surgeon and audiologists who are going to be vital to the success of precision hearing medicine. We engage with ENT trainees and audiologists in a study that we have started about a year ago in the UK. It's called the Seashell study, and it's a UK prospective cohort study of patients with sudden onset hearing loss. This study is purely delivered by the ENT trainees and audiology research networks across, at the moment, more than 70 hospitals in the UK. And it's important to engage with these people because they are the frontline workers that will see the patients in their clinics. So they're going to be the people that are going to have to consult with the patients in the future and explain them the opportunities that precision hearing medicine may offer. The aim of this particular study is to develop a prediction model to predict recovery based on more than 600 patients. And to date, we have included 240 in the study. And we also, in the study, explore the impact of sudden onset hearing loss on patients' quality of life. But a key focus of this trial is also that of this study, this observational study, is also that it will facilitate future trials by providing an understanding of the patient pathways for sensorineural hearing loss. Because often when we embark on a trial of a new drug, we're not entirely sure how we can best recruit the patients and where we can find them. But this type of study actually prepares us for those trials. And one of the trials that is currently happening across several sites within Europe is the Audible S study by the company Sensorion. And again, this type of cohort study can inform those trials. We're also preparing a trial of systemic versus topical steroids, a project that will be funded by the UK Health Technology Assessment Programme. And again, this study is very helpful to prepare us for that study. But also at the same time, what we do by studies like this is building research capacity and capability and prepare the next generation of clinicians for the arrival of novel hearing therapeutics. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Anne. That was really useful overview, and it's really encouraging to see so many treatments in development, and some of the challenges that Anne highlighted there we'll be drilling into in future webinars over the coming months, so we can explore those challenges in more detail. So to kind of comment to our last talk, and actually before we do that, do remember that if you've got any questions, do put them in the Q&A box for us, and like other questions, if you see a question there that you like, that'd be really useful. So I want to move on to our last speaker, who's Hugh Strickland. So welcome, Hugh. It's great to have you with us. So Hugh has hearing loss, and he's kindly offered to share his experiences of hearing loss with us. And in particular, I guess, the sort of the needs and priorities that people with hearing loss perhaps have in terms of treatments. So Hugh, over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ralph. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Hugh. I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer. The work I deal with is buying and selling businesses and business finance, business investment. Some of it is life science businesses, but by no means all. We've got hereditary deafness in the family. My father's got it, my grandmother had it, my great-grandfather. One of my daughters has got it. And it appears throughout the family, through cousins and the like. We've all been tested when we were very young children in the expectation that some of us would inherit. My brother and my sister are fine, I've got it. Of my 3 children, 1 has got it, but the other 2 haven't. So it doesn't appear everywhere. And it's middle ear, it's hair cell loss damage. The shape of the hearing loss is almost like an S-curve. In early life, the higher frequencies, almost perfect hearing, but the lower frequencies, there's about a 25% loss. And with age and damage, noise-induced damage, what have you, that drops. And of course, then age-related hearing loss catches up with us as well, and we're going down here. In 2016, I lost, in fact, the final hearing in my left ear. So I'm completely reliant on a hearing aid in my right ear. But I didn't start wearing hearing aids until I was in my mid-20s. So the early part of my life, you probably tell in my speech that I'm not obviously deaf. People who've never been able to hear can't speak in the same way. So I'm very fortunate there. Now I'm speaking really about my own personal experiences of deafness. Large proportion of the population will only ever have age-related hearing loss. There will be people who've been permanently deaf from birth. I'm somewhere in the middle of that. The things that make a difference to me when I'm trying to communicate with somebody, the things that science and tech can help with, probably the most important thing is the ability to see the speaker or the source of sound. If you're not deaf, you don't realize just quite how much communication is non-verbal. Obviously, we're going through a pandemic at the moment and people having to wear masks. That makes it a complete nightmare. I mean, people are being very good about it when I ask them to remove their mask, but it just gives you an indication. Background noise is the other big area. Meeting rooms where there are lots of people, noisy restaurants or parties, even the car radio. And it's not just about the volume of what you're hearing, it's about the clarity of the sound. Now, of course, some of these things are dealt with by the amazing modern technology we've got. The hearing aid I do have is Bluetooth enabled, so I can stream sound to that. I've also got a little dongle that I can put in the middle of a meeting room or on a speaker, so that it streams straight to the hearing aid. And that makes a massive difference. Subtitles, we've got today, we've got the British Sign Language, subtitles, the closed captioning. That makes a massive difference to us as well. We've talked about face-to-face communication. One of the good things that's come out of lockdown actually is people using things like Zoom. This is the next best thing for me to a face-to-face meeting with somebody. If I possibly can, I will avoid the telephone. Other issues, I often think, you know, wet weather, being on the beach, going swimming. I'm reluctant to do those things just because obviously I don't want to damage the sensitive electronics in the hearing aid I have. But also I don't want to get an infection in my remaining ear. There's a big impact on self-confidence. If people don't know you're deaf, you may be having a conversation that you think you're having, but the other person is having a different conversation, and so you can appear stupid. Now, I don't think the deaf community are any more stupid than the general population as a whole. So the way I deal with that is being very open with people that I'm deaf and that they need to make allowances, and people are always willing to do that. There's two other things that I haven't mentioned. One is cochlear implants. I've got the opportunity to have a cochlear implant in my left ear. I've been reluctant to do that because some of the developments, regain and these other things, might just be able to regenerate enough hair cells in that ear that I can start using a hearing aid again. That would be a major achievement for me. But of course, if I go to a cochlear implant, it's probably unlikely to be able to redo the hair cells. But the other thing is tinnitus. One of my daughters isn't deaf, but she's now got tinnitus. I've got tinnitus. It's there at a constant level the whole time. There are certain things that make it worse. Coffee, caffeine is a particular trigger for me. Red wine, too much tonic. I'm fine with the gin bit, by the way, it's just the tonic. And stress. Now, too many of those things, I feel the ringing getting worse. Dealing with deafness and tinnitus in meetings or social environments, you have to concentrate so hard. It really can be very exhausting. I hope that's given you a bit of a feel for what it's like for me, at least, being deaf. I'm really, really grateful to be involved in this. I'm really, really grateful to all of you scientists, technology, and of course, Ralph, with Action on Hearing Loss, for everything you're doing on this front. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Hugh, for that insight into living with hearing loss. It's really, really helpful. So I think all our speakers have got their cameras back on again. So we've got some questions. If people have more questions, then do let us know. So I guess the first question actually I might direct to you, David. And so we've got a question saying, do you see the role of audiologists expanding into therapeutic treatments? So yeah, David, do you see, I mean, how well prepared do you think we are for these new emerging treatments, and what role might audiologists play in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful question, and I think it's really important. The audiology community is a massive resource here. In most places now, they're the first port of call for people with a hearing loss. They've got good training. Many of them have got research components to their training. And there's a major resource there that we need to empower. And the Audiologist Research Network in the NHS that Anna has been a prime mover in instigating and championing is a major lead there. But I think your question today, actually, interestingly, is from the independent sector. I speak with that sector a lot, and they are very bright, very motivated. They're seeing a lot of patients. They're using very high-end devices, and we're really not using those colleagues to try and be a conduit for that. So I think a reach out to the BSHAR and AHIP communities, I'd be very happy to be part of that, would be a major development in that area. So the headline news is absolutely yes.
Okay, thanks, David. And so Anne, I might ask you this next question, which is, it sort of builds, I think, on what David was just talking about. So it's two parts to it. And how much time do you think, how long would you think it will be until the first drug for sensorineural hearing loss is approved? Obviously, that's a really hard question, but everyone asks it. But then there was a second part around, do you think hearing aids over time will be replaced by new therapies? So I guess, Anne, it'd be interesting to understand your sort of view on how do you see novel therapeutics and hearing aids? You know, are they going to be working together, or do you think one's going to replace the other in the future?
Yes, I think very useful questions. I think it's going to take a little while before we see those treatments coming into our clinic. And we're talking, I think, really about years, 5 years maybe. But there's still a lot of steps that we have to go through, late phase trials, large scale trials that still have to happen. So a few more years, I think. I think what we've shown today is that there are so many underlying causes of hearing loss that I think we're going to need more than one approach for most people. And I think we also are not sure that it will completely restore hearing. But what Hugh has already alluded to, if we can, for example, regenerate his hearing to such an extent that he can use his hearing aid again, that is a major achievement. I think if we can develop drugs that hold the progression of hearing loss so people can postpone the years with where they have to use a hearing aid, that's a big win as well. But complete restoration and getting rid of hearing aids, I'm not sure whether that's a realistic expectation.
Okay, thanks, Anne. So actually, Hugh, so I have a question myself actually for you, Hugh. So obviously, you know, you're aware of, you know, some of the treatments that are in development. You know, Anne spoke about the REgain treatment to restore hearing. So obviously, some of these treatments are taken orally. Other treatments, I guess, things like cell therapies will involve invasive surgery. So I was wondering if you could comment on, you know, what would you sort of tolerate in order to kind of improve your hearing, and you know, what's the kind of balance between, you know, having surgery and how much improvement in hearing would that need to generate in order to be something
within reason, anything really. Obviously, my wife takes a pill every day, as many women do. I mean, that's no real hardship. To expect me to have to do something like that, that would be fine. The thought of an injection directly into the eardrum, that fills me with a degree of nervousness. Having to do something on a regular basis doesn't bother me. I go for regular audiology checkups once every 6 months or so. And turning that into monthly or 6 weekly or something like that would not be a problem. It's improving things. Anything that improves it as a benefit.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Hugh. That's useful. So we've got another question asking about I guess, the challenges of identifying and recruiting patients with hearing loss into research. And I guess the question is, is there an accessible database of research volunteers that I guess the syndicate could help innovators access? Perhaps Anne, are you able to comment on what we have at the moment?
Yeah, I think both David within the Nottingham BRC as well, Kevin in the Manchester BRC and ourselves in the London BRC, we have big databases of people that have approached us over the years who are keen to take part in clinical trials. For some of the people, you have details about the cause of hearing loss, so it might be more obvious where people, in which trial people might want to take part. But what we really need, and I haven't alluded to that today in my talk, is registries. National and international registries, comprehensive patient databases, where we collate this information on a national level and where we can learn from those data on people what types of hearing loss there are, better genophenotype patients. And then those registries can also form the basis for future trials, where we can identify people that have a particular genophenotype for a particular trial. And that's something that we are working on.
Okay, thanks, Anne. So I think earlier on, yes, yeah, David. Yeah.
I really yearn for a world where everybody who gets a hearing aid or has a hearing test in the NHS is asked, would you like to be a research participant? Do we have access to your data? Because every audiology department has a huge database of hearing aid users, of people who've had hearing tests. It's a vastly underutilized resource and is an opportunity there for the taking. So there's some work that needs to be done in that area.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, David. A few people are asking about the drug company Frequency and their drug that's being in development. It's FX322 to be really precise. But a couple of people asking about that. I don't know, Anne, do you know much about that treatment, and can you say anything about it?
Well, I think it's a very exciting regenerative hearing drug that targets, again, the regenerative potential within the inner ear. The company has just completed their phase 2 trial, so they've looked beyond safety, which the drug was safe. They've looked at efficacy, and they do see some patients responding, which is incredibly promising. Again, for such a drug to then move into the next stage, which is large-scale clinical trials, it's going to take a while before it becomes available, but definitely being able to pick up the first signals that a drug can work is really, really important.
Okay, thanks, Anne. So obviously you're very popular, Anne. So the number, so 4 votes on this question. Do you think intratympanic injections will become the sort of the routine for delivering treatments for hearing loss?
Yeah, so it's not the most ideal delivery method, as you just alluded to. He's not looking forward to it because it's not pleasant. But we know that in ophthalmology, injections are being given all the time with VEGF, and that has become routine practice. So the challenge is that the inner ear is very hard to reach. So we will, to some extent, probably have to rely on intratympanic injections for quite a while. I think in the future, it depends on what you call routine, but I think it will definitely become part of the arsenal of treatments that audiologists and ENT surgeons will be able to offer patients in the future.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I think we're probably out of time in terms of the questions and answers session. You know, we've got all of the questions here, so we'll definitely take a look at those and reflect on those. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so I just wanted to, to sort of wrap up by flagging our next webinar, which will be on the 20th of October. And in that webinar, we're going to drill into some of the challenges that I think we've been talking about today, particularly around, what are the best models, preclinical models. We've spoken about the whole kind of heterogeneous, mix of people with different types of hearing loss. So how do we use biomarkers? How do we define those patient populations? And how do we measure benefit, when we're testing new treatments? So they're the kind of some of the challenges we'll be looking at in our next webinar on the 20th of October. We've got some great speakers. So please do sign up there. There's a link on the screen there that you can follow to take part in that webinar as well. Also, do connect with us if you'd like to understand how our Hearing Medicines Discovery Syndicate can help you. So do take a look at our website and do get in contact. So I think that's everything for me. It's been a really great hour. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much to our speakers for taking the time to present. It's been really great. Thank you to our communication support providers. Great job, and it's great that we've been able to make this accessible to everybody. And thank you everyone for registering and taking part, and hopefully see you virtually on the 20th of October. Okay, thank you, bye.